are there. Why is that? Okay. But we are live. All right. Okay. All right, everyone, welcome to ETH Vancouver meetup held here every Thursday at DCTRL. We have an exciting event ahead, but first off, just want to point out a few housekeeping things and some announcements. For those who have not yet joined the EthVan or DCTRL communities online, please scan the QR codes up on the wall. There's also a poster. I think that one's up top there as well. So you can scan those and get into all the Discord, Twitter, and Telegram. There's also a POAP dispenser. So if you're looking for a POAP to say that you've been here, there's one on the wall, and there's also another one at the back. A nice big sign at on the table. So use your phone's NFC chip, tap it, and you can mint a POAP for free. Yeah. So then you just need to put in your ENS or your Ethereum address, and off you go. Events coming up tomorrow night at 9 p.m. till late. We've got a social gathering here at DCTRL. Dave's going to be kind of here for that. So, yeah, there'll be DJ music, pool, and games. Feel free to, if you want to learn how to DJ as well, the decks will be open. So if you come early, Dave might be able to teach you a little bit. Yeah, if you want to jam, you can do that too. Some other options for that. Drop in anytime. It's usually open till late. So this Saturday and every Saturday at noon is the Nouns Running Club 5K. So everyone's welcome to join if you're looking for some exercise on Saturday. Next Saturday, a special event. The following one. Okay, special thing coming. So, yeah, feel free. Actually, we should kill those. Yep. Oh, yeah, and that thing. Yeah. This takes a...
If not, don't worry. I don't need the hair light.
You can figure that out. Would be great. There's a button on there somewhere. Yeah, so basically the Nouns Run meet over at Cactus Club near Cole Harbor, and there's the the Christmas market there, so just on the far side closer to the entrance of Cactus Club. So meet up there and be sure to collect your POAP to commemorate your run afterwards. Next Wednesday, 6:30 p.m., ZK Study Group returns again back to Vancouver at DCTRL. Yeah, so diving into the use around zero-knowledge proofs. Everyone is welcome, but generally a more technical discussion, so be ready for some math. And then the following Thursday will be the EthVan Christmas party. We will have some drinks and snacks, but feel free to bring anything you would like. 6 to 9 p.m., 10 p.m., something like that. So feel free to come by next week for that. All right, let's get ready for tonight's presentation. We have Yoni presenting on the hidden life of on-chain, or of assets on-chain. This time around, we'll kind of wait for questions, or are you cool with him halfway?
You can try to interrupt and derail, but it won't work.
All right, but raise your hand afterwards. We'll get you a microphone, and please be sure to, but if you have a question, raise your hand. We'll get you a microphone so that the people at home can hear you as well. We want to be able to do that. All right, Yoni, take it away.
All right, thank you. Good evening. Well, I'm Yoni. I'm an independent researcher, focusing mainly in security, but I became interested in token design and blockchain art at some point, investigating things on chain. And my talk is called The Hidden Life of Assets on Chain, but I'm not going to deal so much with the way that the assets are represented, like say for an NFT as a picture, or storing any of the artwork on chain. I'm more interested in what structures give rise to these assets and how are they accounted for in the EVM. That includes EVM chains. So I made the title a little tantalizing, a little mysterious. Is this popping too much? No, we're good. Okay. But it was a deception to get you in here because it's actually be very boring and you might learn something about the EVM. So, yeah, these are not the goals so much as the the questions I want to answer. I'm interested in ontology. So, what is it's a fancy word which is meaning what is permitted to exist within a system's rules. Like what kind of entities? How can we categorize them? What are their capabilities? Can you verify their capabilities? So these shake out to, different verbs, which ends up being important for, design of how a user might interact with something. Next, observability. What can we actually detect without having to download the entire chain and verify it ourselves? Like, this is an implication for anything off-chain that's indexing, say, events, which we'll talk about, or smaller light clients that need to understand what is the latest state of things, without spending too much time on computation or capacity. And then some implications for EVM security, which is my wheelhouse, especially around spoofing, other kind of attacks and scams, and more importantly, bugs in smart contracts. And finally, token design in general, as well as like conceptual blockchain art, which I find people are experimenting the most in terms of new kinds of tokens and different kinds of interactions that you might not expect. So all of that, I see all of that as kind of part of a hacker or experimental mindset that you'd find, whether in an artist or some other researcher. So I like this framework from Chris F. I actually don't know what his full name is, but he's with Blockstar and in Flamingo DAO and a few other like collecting DAOs. But he proposed this framework called Toka, and I made a nice picture of what it evokes for me. So it's kind of envisioning a universe of different entities, which he's calling application level primitives, right? Things that we might be able to interact with that emerge from the chain. So he defines tokens as digital representations of value or access rights. So a claim on something. I think we're all familiar with that, but it's really like a piece of something resembling a coin, and we think of them as coins. We even call them coins, except for Ether. Then objects, which he calls modular self-contained units of functionality, especially where they can be composed into other things. They can be referenced, added, removed. So for me, that means maybe an automated market maker, a multi-sig, some grouping of accounts that's more than just a contract, or something more abstract than that. I haven't seen too many objects, so you can think of some that might fit into that framework. Let me know. And then contracts, which everyone knows are supposed to enable trustless interactions, encode rules, but sometimes they bend those rules. And persist and attest to data, which is important for asset issuance, as we'll see. I disagree with Chris in that he's calling contracts, saying that they're capable of automated execution, which sounds like they're autonomous, but that's actually not the case, as we'll see. They require something else external to them. And then agents, which I think is the most important for the future, even though we haven't seen many objects yet. We definitely haven't seen too many agents besides humans, right? Sometimes DAOs, and everyone knows bots, which are just programs off-chain that control an account or a contract, but they don't live or emerge from the blockchain as such. And then hopefully AIs with wallets and actually behaving autonomously on chain. That would be very interesting. And then being able to trade them or ascribe value to them. Haven't seen that much yet, but if someone has an example, I'd like to hear it. So each component in Toka, the point is that they can be upgraded, replaced, reconfigured without disrupting the entire system. In fact, they would comprise like a different system unto themselves, like say agents and using specific contracts in certain modules, issuing certain tokens, and that's like comprises an ecosystem, as it were. And why are we not going forward? Okay, so about the EVM, it's an account-based model, and I stole this from a really nice visualization chart of the yellow paper, which again is the implementation spec for Ethereum, not the white paper, which was very theoretical, right? The yellow paper specifically, but it is very technical. So breaking it down like this is helpful for me. The takeaway from this is that there's a world state and it's really just a mapping of addresses to accounts. And the accounts have a certain amount of storage, and it's in a cryptographic database. First of all, it has a data structure, which is, I call it a trie. Some people call it a tree. And if we care for the difference between them, I have that on the next slide. But it's just an efficient way of storing this data. And it ends up being a state DB, what's called the state DB on every node, right? So it's distributed across the network. That's important. And we're not advancing here for some reason. There we go. Okay. Yeah, that was just the difference between a tree and a trie, but no one asked, so we can continue on. Just that the trie includes data in the path rather than in the individual node. Okay. So we actually have to go to the yellow paper because it's not a good visual of this. There's two types of accounts enshrined in EVM. One is the externally owned account, or EOA. Everyone, I assume, has one and has interacted with it. The key about it is that it doesn't have, as we saw before here, in the middle, that there are fields in the data structure, a nonce, a balance, a storage root, and a code hash. The externally owned account does not have bytecode, right? It doesn't run any code. So it has no code hash. It has no storage to speak of, and that's an important point later, because our mental model is like things are in the account or in the wallet, but that's not actually the case. And then a nonce, which is a nonsense number, it's basically just a counter that increments every time a transaction is sent from that account. Then there are contract accounts, which we'll dive deeper in a second. And these have bytecode greater than 0. So they have some execution capability. They have a nonce that starts at 1. It didn't at Genesis it wasn't like that, but now they have a nonce that starts at 1, and it increments when this contract creates another contract. So you can think of like a factory pattern, or a contract that will deploy others, and that will increment, so you can tell what's descended from what. The yellow paper, and now here the part that I highlighted, is that it says an account is empty when it has no code, 0 nonce, and 0 balance. And then it makes a special case for pre-compiled contracts, which are kind of built into the protocol. Like say, if you've ever looked at how signatures are recovered or validated Onchain, that's EC Recover is one of these pre-compiled contracts. We almost never look at them unless we're deep in development or review. But those are the kind of properties of different accounts in EVM. Then there is a special case which has fascinated me for a long time, ever since I started looking into it. The specification, the protocol, defines a special account, which I'm calling the null address. Sometimes they call it a 0 address. The yellow paper calls it an empty byte sequence, or uses a null sign representing empty set for it. So it has many different names, but what is it? Okay. It is an account, but it has special properties that are... Why? Can we...
Yeah, we're trying.
Yeah.
Just move it a little bit further away from your mouth a bit.
All right. Yeah. It's annoying me.
Down.
All right. Down?
Yeah.
How's that? Good. Okay. Back to the null. All right. These are its properties. It is set to the... if it's set as the from, it creates an asset. If it's set as to with bytecode, it deploys a contract at an address that's derived from the account, or the address sending, and the nonce. And then it is also the default value for the Ether base, which in Bitcoin is the coin base. So this is like the reward for block production. It ends up being a destination for burned base fees as well after the London hard fork, or slash balances from validator accounts. So it's almost like a default that's given as an empty address without having any, it can't send transactions. It's sort of this in-between, something that should be enshrined but behaves like an account, as we'll see. So you can see sometimes it's credited with block production, but that's because someone hasn't configured it. They haven't configured the default. Oh yeah, and we can also check. I don't know if you can see this on the terminal. Let's see. Can we get to a terminal? We can look at it directly on chain. No, we can't. Okay, never mind. I would show you that it actually has no code, but it has a large Ethereum balance. We'll get back to that in a little bit because it's an interesting case. So contract accounts, the key point here is that no one has the private key to them, even though one might mathematically exist. They contain and are controlled by EVM code, and they cannot initiate any state changing transactions. So it's always some other agent, right? Whether it's an EOA or maybe some other kind of program like a bot that has to initiate them. But other contracts can call functions marked external, right? And that's how we get nice composability within their execution. The yellow paper, well, actually like a translation of the yellow paper into less jargon, calls them some bytecode associated with an account or autonomous object. So even back then in the spec, which I believe was written by Gavin Wood, they're referring to autonomous objects prospectively, and maybe designing in that direction. What else did I have written here? Yeah, just more yellow paper jargon. But we can see that unlike an EOA, it has a storage hash, right? So it has some data associated with it, and it has a code hash pointing to that it's the hash of whatever its EVM bytecode is, so it can execute. And this storage has different properties. So there are data locations that can happen within the EVM. And they have different levels of what I would call permanence or operations that shake out from them. There's hard coding things in the bytecode itself, right, which is just a value that's always there. It's on chain forever, but it's read only. So this would be like a constant or some immutable variable. Then there's storage, which I've highlighted because that's the most interesting for us, or this is what most assets are using to persist themselves. It's read and write. You can think of it like we saw in the diagram with a database for an account on each node, and importantly, it persists between transactions. So it's very composable, but a little expensive. Then there's memory, and I've made it faded out because it really is very temporary. It's just within a function call. So when something is executing EVM, you can use it for operations, but then it's gone. And then after Denkun hard fork, we get transients, which are temporary storage within a transaction instead of a function call, and have some gas savings on that. And then there's call data, which people might be more familiar with now. I've seen it referred to as append only, as in you can write once to it and then read it later off chain. But it's really like the transaction parameters. And if anyone has paid attention to what happened with ordinal inscriptions on Bitcoin or even on other chains now, which is creating a lot of spam, is that people are creating assets by encoding things into call data, and then using heavy off-chain indexers to attest that they exist or that they've been transferred. But they're not really touching storage, which is kind of interesting. Although I would argue that it's still on-chain because it's part of a transaction trie, which is stored on each node. So it's just part of, ends up in logs and transaction receipts. But you do need a full node to look at the whole history, and it's difficult unless you have a known item that you're looking for. So looking at storage, real quick, what we learn is that accounts, as in EOAs, don't really contain the assets. The contract itself uses storage to record our ownership, and this has certain costs associated with it, but creates value because it's very easy to use and has some provenance associated with it. It's really either a mapping to in the contract standards, token standards. It's either a mapping of addresses to balances, or sometimes a mapping of addresses to token IDs, right? And that's what's attesting to the ownership of a given token, either a balance or an NFT token ID. What else to say about these? Yeah, and then I have a nice tool on EVM storage. Let's see if we can get to it. No. Here we go. Does that work? Yeah, I'm unable to change windows on this, which is really annoying. Anyway, you would see that it's a mapping of hashes to values. We don't need to dwell on that too much. It's just for curiosity. But you can look at them in this nice site called EVM Storage, where you can put in a contract address and drill down really into it, and see different views about how they're stored. Okay. That's all I wanted to say about that. Then events, which are very interesting for me. They inform an off-chain index or something happened, right? They're supposed to let something else know that state was changed or something important happened. Their return value that's cheaper than storage, although there is small gas cost with them. So they're not free to use, but it's a better alternative sometimes, and they're verified in the receipts, so you can kind of know that they were legitimately came from a certain contract or address, but more importantly not what they're about, and we'll see that later. And then the receipts are, of course, what's happening? Oh, thank you. And they're validated by nodes. So they're part of the logging system. And in fact, they're called logs in the yellow paper. So this is where we get into observability. Someone needs to be watching the chain and indexing these events and making sense of them to know that something actually happened. Because let's say you present me an account and then say, all right, what tokens does this account own besides Ether, besides the natively issued asset, which, as we saw, was in it's a balance in the state DB. You actually don't know. You have to have a list of contracts to check it against to get those events. So unless you've added them directly or given the account address, we watched for different events, or we have a node and we can go say, all right, give me all the events that look like transfers, right? The latest ones, the ones, as of the last block, and then we can tell you how many tokens you actually own. So the events are very important. What else? And it's interesting that they're stored in a data structure called a Bloom filter, which is part of every block header. And all the nodes must validate that, right? And it's very lightweight for checking for inclusion in a set, but it can give false positives as to that inclusion. But it scales quite nicely. Not the inverse though. It can't give you a wrong false negative. Because again, scanning for each block would be computationally scanning each block for things that happened would be more expensive. And this is what they look like, and what an indexer might present to you. So this is a transfer event, and we can see that it has this is what would be called the signature with the variable names. It has a from, a to, and a value. And then in the topics, and what's actually stored is a hash of this signature, again, the from, the to, and some data. So this is just transferring one of an ERC20 to, again, the null address to burn it, because no one owns that. And this is how it would look in bytes if we drilled into it. So one thing that shakes out from this is that spoofing is possible because the ERC20 standard transfer and transfer funcs allow an arbitrary address as the from, or as the sender rather than the caller. And if you drill down into it, you could see that it was called by something else. But this is why we can spoof different kinds of transactions, because they just have to present the same signature and use the same data, but they don't have to make those underlying storage changes, which I think is very interesting. There's also anonymous events which they don't have a signature, so they can get one more. They can fit one more topic, so some more bytes. But we won't go into that too much, except to say that, like, all of these things have fooled, say, off-chain index or like Etherscan in the past, which we think of as, this is what the chain looks like, but it's not actually the case. And we can talk about different asset standards now. Token standards, I think people are familiar with ERC20, the fungible token, the non-fungible token, 1155, the multi-token. Here we've had talks on tokenized vaults, which have an interesting way of tracking balances and 721s, and they are themselves non-fungible. And we've also had a talk by Benny from Future Primitive on 6551 token bound NFT bound accounts, which is like giving an NFT a wallet and nesting things into them. And there are more exotic tokens out there, but not all of them are final, or some are deprecated, and they can cause problems in, say, DeFi when people are not, aware of them. One interesting thing is, like, how do you know? A question that I had when looking at these things is, like, how do I know that something is behaving honestly? Because there is a standard EIP 165 for exposing a standard interface, like, say, I understand the functions of ERC20 and I can receive tokens in this way, but there's nothing preventing it from lying about that or deceiving you. It's not really in force until you make that call and it reverts. It could do anything. So then we get to issuance. Once again, this happens from the null address as kind of a quirk of accounting. It's not like where are these things before they're created? They're in the null. They're in some black hole, and then they come forth. So with a fungible token, we're increasing the recipient balance and also the total supply, because the contract is keeping track of how many are out there. For non-fungible, we're setting an owner to a token ID mapping and then marking that token ID as existing and increasing the total supply. And then finally emitting mint events that this happened. And this is how ownership would be represented. Here we have a standard transfer function, and what it's I've pulled out some checks and other cruft here, but really it is reducing a sender's balance, increasing a recipient's balance, and emitting a transfer event. And we can see that it's mutating storage in this way from one value to the next. These are the reason that there's so many zeros is because they're padded to 32 bytes. So that's all very interesting, but it's really that you have these mappings which are attesting to a certain balance that said within the contract storage you own this token, and you have the right to transfer to someone else. Then they own it, and we change the global supply. And then everyone's favorite destruction, which sometimes we call burning, but is a weird metaphor for it. So could it be like a recall because the destination and the source are the same? If the tokens emerge from the null address when they're minted, and then they return there when they're destroyed. But really, destruction is decrementing total supply and decrementing a given account's balance in that mapping, and then of course emitting the event. And this is where it gets a little strange, in terms of what actually happens is that it is not actually accounting for it in the null address. It's just emitting an event that says it was sent there so that we can index, because we've decided on a standard that they need they need a destination or a two in this field. But really, that's not what's happening. And I think that is the ERC721, the NFT burn, which is mostly the same. It's just removing the token ID from a token owner's, and ideally that should be reducing the supply as well. The contracts also have two types of destruction that they can undergo, which I don't have a good visual for, but one of them is self-destruct. And but first we'll talk about the contract burn, which I see some projects do, and it's just they set the owner to the null address so that no one can ever call the functions again. No one has admin access. So this is like renouncing access to the contract to anyone. And then some more interesting facts about burns. So this is more of a standard burn, but and ERC20s can't be sent to the null directly, like they can't be transferred. They can only call this burn function. So some people transfer to a different address, which is called the dead address because it ends in DEAD in hexadecimal. And again, no one, it's contrived such that no one can calculate a private key for it, so no one controls it, but it's not, it's not the customary place where they would go in the protocol, so I'm calling it non-standard. So there are a bunch of these conventional burn addresses, and the problem is an off-chain indexer needs to maintain a list of them. And there are many arbitrary choices. I've seen, 42069 dead, different combinations of that. And like, all right, you have to be aware that these things exist, add them to a list, find all the events, then we can say something was verifiably burned. There's also a special case which I've seen recently called the teleburn, which comes to us from, again, Bitcoin Ordinal Protocol, where they derive an account address, again, that can't be known in advance because it's derived from an inscription hash. So we're burning an asset by placing it there. We're not removing it from supply. We're not decrementing a balance. We're just sending it to an account that maybe no one can own. Yeah, maybe. So it is very interesting where we're going in terms of that, in terms of what the chain, what the accounting on chain says. But the takeaway is that only the event is indexed, and the null account, as we saw, is more like less like a contract with like light enshrinement, so it really doesn't have any storage. What else? Oh yeah, this is the self-destruct opcode, and here I'm just calling for the storage of a self-destructed contract from Cast, which is part of Foundry Suite, and it says provided address has no deployed code and thus no storage. So what self-destruct does, the opcode, it deletes the bytecode, clears the storage, and forces that either elsewhere. Now, this is actually seemingly returning it to the same state as an EOA. But again, no one has the key for that. And there are weird edge cases, which is why there is an EIP 4758 to deactivate self-destruct. Because in every case, when you want you want to deprecate a contract, you want to remove it, the history always exists. You don't want people sending either there, maybe or tokens. You can't rescue them. Maybe you want to force them to stop using it. Pausing is always just better, except that requires some amount of permission access. I guess a lot like self-destruct. But I can think of a contract where like anyone could call self-destruct after certain criteria is met, which is kind of interesting. So there is a caveat to this, which someone might bring up, which is deterministic deployment, which is possible. And it creates more security issues because, again, you force either to be sent elsewhere. And some contracts haven't accounted for that idea, that they can avoid, rejecting the either. Okay, so I want to tie together storage and event into some kind of little taxonomy here, which I'm calling tokenness. So we have whether something is uses standard storage or not. It could even use storage but override it in some way, override its behavior, and then whether it emits a standard event or not. And so I'm calling these standard tokens a spoof token would be something that emits an event but is not stored in any sense. So we can't speak to balance of something or ownership. And then we're seeing more of, because of regulatory pressure, I assume, and the problem with launching a token is that we see more points, right? And I don't mean just in someone's SQL database. I mean like an on-chain point, like that's accruing to you. You can verify this because of, assume your actions on chain. We're not emitting transfer events. Maybe we don't let you transfer the points, but it's a stand-in for some kind of token later. So I think that anything on chain that's using storage, whether it emits an event or not, is real in terms of the blockchain, and anything that is not storing itself or is not storing and not emitting event is something virtual, right? Like we can only attest to it, conceptually. So what is possible from this model is that there are different ways to mutate storage and data. There are different ways to override exchange actions, and then withholding or deceiving off-chain indexers based on mint, transfer, burn events, maybe even others. And by deceive, I mean like emitting the event and then not actually changing storage in the way that you would think. So we can conceive of sometimes tokens as art. Joe Looney, if anyone knows Joe Looney, who created the Rare Pepe wallet, says that the token is the art. He likes to repeat this without explanation. A program, whether that's a contract or some other grouping of bytecode or execution capability, that could be art. And economic games played on chain, which we're starting to see with certain frameworks out there. So this was an interesting experiment, which was done by Dom Dehoff on Twitter. And it was a spin-off of Loot, which was an on-chain, equipment inventory, which people went crazy over. And basically what it does is it derives the owner without using storage whatsoever. It derives the token ID from the address without ever updating. So once it's minted as a placeholder, we can see in the code, it just says that it always exists, and then emits the transfer address, although that really didn't happen. As far as, either scan or something else is concerned, it did. So I find that sort of interesting as an experiment. So yeah, you can own these, but what do you really own? And the key is that they're actually not transferable. They're more like soul-bound tokens, but interesting experiment. Then there are tokens that people have done to basically trap bots to attack them by intervening in the transfer event. Whether one is called Salmonella, and it attacks certain kinds of MEV bots doing sandwich attacks by taxing their swaps and then emitting the event totally normally. So it's deceiving them or deceiving, whatever off-chain indexer program is governing the bot, or maybe checking in on it. So that person made a lot of money that way. And then more on the art side again, who I like is a Canadian artist called Figure 31, who he wasn't the first to do this, but created a token called Reaper's Gambit, which again, is concept art, attacks MEV bots and forgetful holders, because it locks the tokens after 9 days unless they're moved to a totally new unique address. And the way we do that is we keep track of or the way he does that is keeping track of the address in storage, and allowing no repeats because it's indexed that way. And you can also, if you're thinking of like, well, how would it have a market? There is a allow list that prevents it being locked when it's in an liquidity pool on Uniswap. So you can always trade the token. And I'm open to other kind of if anyone has any more interesting experiments, again, that could be art, that could be different token designs that play with storage and events in interesting ways in EVM, and I think we get we get some insight into how these assets actually work this way. But I'll end it there and open it up to questions because we seem to be a little over time.
Thanks, Yoni. That was awesome. Yeah.
Hello.
Hello. Cool. Okay. Thank you. That was awesome. Really, really informative and looked into a lot of the deeper things that we don't really think about. I was curious about when you talked about self-destruct. I never really thought about this before. But if you created the contract with create2, self-destruct it, can you recreate that and add storage back?
Yes, you can.
Interesting. Okay.
But there are constraints on it. It needs to be more or less the same. I mean, you could be very clever and search for something with the same bytecode.
Yeah.
Basically, it has to have the very, very, very similar bytecode code hash.
Right.
But it can have different storage. So what people have done is that they've deterministically they can self-destruct, they can deploy again, and then give it a different implementation address that's like a proxy. And then you can do totally different things.
Yeah.
So if you look at some of these standard libraries, including Solidity, which is more about optimizing for gas usage, it's trying to explicitly forbid self-destructing.
Okay.
It's trying to anticipate when that happens and avoid that because it is a vulnerability.
Cool. One other quick question, if you don't mind. Would you classify the salmonella and I can't remember the other one? Would that be a hack? Is it is that morally bad? Is it morally good? Big loaded question, but
well, I think a lot of people hate MEV bots, or they don't understand what's happening or how it shakes out of the incentives. So no, it's neutral. I don't like where some bot operators have come tried to attack people that or dox people, get the money back in some way, right? They tried to retaliate for slipping up, but no, I think their artworks is my point. They're just they're different kind of tokens and objects.
Yeah, understand.
Always say that something is concept art or performance art, and you can get away with anything.
Yeah. Do you have to return the funds though?
No.
It was donate.
No.
Donation to the art.
Yeah. I would say I lost the keys. I don't know.
Any other questions?
Surely there are other questions.
You mentioned a bunch of token standards. What if you have a really old token standard and you want to update it? Do you have to do each individual holder has to migrate, or is there any standard on migration to new standards? If that makes sense.
There is, and I've actually written wrappers. Actually, what got me, a little backstory, what got me into this is that I was looking for really old tokens and projects back in 2021 and having some success, and then people come out of the woodwork with them and you want to wrap them and give them a standard interface while retaining that. So it really would be just referring to the old contract and copying the storage or copying that mapping again, whether it's a certain token ID or not. But there are plenty that don't follow those rules, and you really just have to try to preserve the provenance however you can. But I think it's more valuable when they again persisted in some way. It used to be storage. We think of that as valuable, but call data 2 and other ways of retrieving that people are leaning towards more. So my answer is it really depends on the standard to migrate. But yeah, I saw a lot of them that didn't emit transfer events, and so you couldn't actually, if you all you know is Etherscan and that's your world, it looked like nothing was going on. Like people are just doing arbitrary low value transactions, and now they're even filtered out because they're like they have zero value attached to them. They're like spam, but actually in the background they were updating storage. They just weren't emitting that event, so they were kind of stealth in a certain way. And unless you know to look for them, again, having that list to check, you're not gonna see them. They can really fly under the radar. So there's a few of them like that.
Follow up if no one else has a question. You mentioned a lot of these stealth transaction contracts and stuff. Could you create some form of anonymity, or would it just Etherscan just updates and then you can no longer be stealth? Like,
yeah, I'm sure they could interpret the events later. They're really on the ball for just one company in Malaysia that everyone relies on for infra. They could update it. You can see there's some dApps that will crowdsource the imputation of transactions. Like, what did this do, right? I see that on Zapper and a few others. They want to, interpret a transaction and give more context to it because they can't tell in an automated way. So, no, it's more like security through obscurity. If someone had the capability to just, again, trawl through the whole chain and create new indices, which they're doing. There's a lot of these groups and projects that, as storage cost decreases, it'll be much easier to do. So better rely on cryptography for that kind of thing, because that day is almost over.
Anybody else have any? One more, if that's all right.
Of course.
I thought it seems like it's becoming popular. Maybe it's just the one company, but shadow forks. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Oh yes. So it's funny because I was writing that about events and how they're important in this model of assets, and I saw that there was discussion around should different projects emit events? Like, is it worth the cost? And that there were a few projects getting funding for injecting their own events through shadow forks. I think that it has there is a third party problem with this, that you're not relying on the chain to validate, and you'll probably be locked into their ecosystem if you rely on them. But I think that's cool. I think it's a way to increase the throughput for fewer resources at the moment. But ultimately, we shouldn't be relying on them because everyone needs to be able to check the state of the chain and attest to what happened. So it's cool idea, but I don't think it's sustainable or advisable.
Yeah.
All right. Anything else? It's probably a good time to wrap up here, anyways. So, alrighty. Well, one final round of applause here for Yoni.
Thank you.
All right. We'll just take a quick little 5-minute break. We're just going to get some things reorganized for the live stream and get a couple things set up here. Turn the lights on, and we'll be back at it in a second.
good time to get your POAP.
I'm glad, man. I'm kind of bored with it now.
Yeah.
Oh man, you should have told me to get you something.
Yeah, I know. So I was just saying.
So let's fuck with it a bit. Let's fuck with it.
Close. It's close. Relax.
All right.
Relax. Okay. Relax, motherfucker.
All right. Testing, 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 testing. 1 2. Testing 1 2.
First call to get people back to their seats or something.
Yeah, probably a good idea. I think we're ready to go then.
I think
We
it's
stop
to do,
streaming
like,
and stop recording.
We're stopping?
Yeah, we'll kill it.